Welcome to you all. So this is the first Open Research Awards winners ceremony, I guess we can call it, of this scheme run by Brunel's Open Research Working Group this year for the first time. So just before we get to the winners and to celebrate their steps towards open science and the reasons why they've won this award, just to give a very brief summary of what open science or open research is. We may use those two terms interchangeably throughout this session, depending on who's speaking. But just to kind of give a summary of what that means. So it's basically about making our research practices more transparent throughout the process of research that we may do, whatever discipline. So we're trying to advocate for whatever background or expertise that we have to really start considering how we can make all aspects of our research more open and transparent, from the early stages of getting a study up and running. So thinking about how we can pre-register our research, so openly and publicly declaring what our methods will be, what our analysis might be, and what we plan to do, through pre-registration in websites such as Open Science Framework, towards making the data of our research open, the materials that we produce from that research open as well as things such as open access publishing, which is of course a portion of this, which Brunel is really good at supporting to all of its researchers. But we're really starting to try and push more kind of open research thinking across the research process. And so these awards were set up to kind of recognise researchers' achievements and any small steps they're making to try and make their own research as transparent as possible. So briefly, just to say what Brunel's Open Research Working Group is. So we were set up nearly coming up to 2 years ago now, actually, this summer, with the aim of trying to bring together researchers across Brunel, across different disciplines and career stages, who are interested in and already engaging in open science or open research practices, with an aim to try and promote those practices and to get training and support available for researchers across the university to get them kind of trying out and really adapting these aspects of open research going forward. And you may well have completed this survey for us. Last year, we ran a survey just to get a sense of where people are in terms of their awareness of open research and the extent that they're already engaging or not engaging in any of these practices, just so we could get a sense of where we currently were. And one of the recommendations of things of support that people were asking for, amongst others, were the establishment of some sort of awards structure to recognise achievements moving towards working in a more open way. So these awards have been established as a result of that survey across the Brunel community, to really start the process of recognising the extra work that can go in behind making research more open. So you're probably here because you've heard about our awards. Maybe you applied, or maybe you're part of the judging process, or maybe you're just here to find out a bit more about what's going on. So we ran this for around a month. The applications were open and we closed it a few weeks ago. And so my thanks go to the judging panel, who really turned around the judging of those applications very quickly. And I think most, if not all of you, are here today. So thank you very much for judging these awards, and because of your work we're now able to go ahead and celebrate the achievements of our award winners. So I've popped them all on one screen here, and we're going to hear from each of them separately in this session today. So as you can see, we have winners from across our 3 colleges at Brunel, which is fantastic to see. So we'd like to see that as well going forward as well. So perhaps we can push even more applications across the colleges in future years. So we're going to hear from each of the speakers and winners in turn today. So I'd like to start first of all with the College of Health, Medicine and Life Sciences. We have 2 winning applications from this college, with 2 applications from 3 researchers. So I'm going to start with Dr. Neil O'Connell, first of all, from physiotherapy. Neil couldn't be with us today, so I'm going to give a very brief summary of his application on his behalf. I won't be able to do it justice, but his contact details are in the slides if any of this is of interest. So I'll kick off with our first of our 6 winning applications with a brief kind of summary of Neil's work, which is really, I guess, kind of a meta-science research project, actually. So kind of researching research in the field of pain studies. So Neil does a lot of research and leads a Cochrane group, the Cochrane Pain Palliative and Supportive Care Group, which runs systematic reviews, which are kind of seen as like the gold standard of health research and health systematic reviews. Globally, so really important work, and they'd identified that there were a lot of inconsistencies and divergent results in the field of pain, chronic pain research in adults, and so they looked to kind of investigate why these unusual results were coming up so consistently in the field. And they basically conducted a pre-registration on open science framework of what they were going to do and how they were going to do it, which is available in that link there, that QR code. So that was all publicly available, what they would do and how. And then they went to kind of go into a bit more detail in the kind of meta-science study as to what was actually happening in this area of chronic pain research. So they looked at a total of 10 trials, and they were really looking at things around issues potentially of risk of bias, issues of trust in the way the data was collected, around this area. The slide is here. I'm not an expert in this, and so if you're interested at all, I'd recommend contacting Neil for a bit more information on this. And this paper was recently published in a leading pain journal, with, of course, open access publishing and so on around that. But I think this was kind of really selected as a example of open research for Brunel, because it is kind of a research on research type publication with the goal of trying to make the area of pain research more transparent. So recommendations that came out of this paper that Neil highlighted in these slides were the recommendations for more research in this area to be pre-registered, and importantly, to be true pre-registration. So pre-registering what they're going to do and how before any data was collected, as they found commonly that things might be labelled as pre-registration, but that was actually done when the data already existed. So obviously, we would say that's not true pre-registration. It needs to be done before the data exists. And also they recommended around data needing to be more open, just as a general rule, and that there were basically no examples of any open data yet in the field. So some next steps that Neil highlighted as a result of this early work was to really speak to journal editors as well about raising their awareness about what issues were going on in the field and how they could assist in making those clearer and more transparent guidelines about best practice going forward. And I believe there's a paper going on for that. And also doing kind of some more formal evaluation on best practices and so on going forward. So moving from exploring what issues are going on, but also then importantly acting on those issues and kind of having recommendations in the ground to improve academic practice going forward. So I hope you agree that this is a really nice example of kind of very applied work to really benefit open research within a certain field. And so congratulations to Neil and the colleagues that he acknowledges in this slide here as well for working on that. So that's the first winner. So congratulations to Neil. So moving on now to our second winners in CHIMALS, who are Dr. Adam Lewis and Dr. Elmar Cowell, again from physiotherapy. No favoritism here, it's just that they were the best applications out of the lot we had this year. So I'd like to welcome Adam and Elmar, I believe, to present their slides, and I'll stop sharing mine now to allow you to do that.
Yep, that's me. Just checking, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so I'll kick this off. Adam will nip in midway and at the end. But thanks for this. So yeah, so me and Adam are actually from very different backgrounds. I'm a movement scientist. He's a respiratory physio. And basically, when we joined Brunel, we didn't have any plans to collaborate per se with someone from our respective areas. But through our research interests, and mine, as you can see, are on fear of falling, attention, frailty, and balance in older adults. And through Adam's research on singing and effects of arts interventions on well-being and other outcomes, breathing-related outcomes in people with respiratory conditions. Through our discussions, we actually discovered that there's lots of shared ground there and lots of shared interest in how, for instance, balance and breathing can be mutually influencing each other, and that there are some interventions that we can explore with joint projects. And in my previous studies, I already had a lot of experience with publishing open access, but also making data sets and analysis scripts open access in my quantitative work, as well as pre-registering analysis and protocols. And Adam had a lot of experience with his kind of work, which was mostly in qualitative in nature. So through our discussions, we actually recognized that we should take our projects further and really try to make it as transparent and as adherent to open science principles as possible to make our work fully accountable, transparent, and accessible by everyone so that other people can also build on this. So what we basically have done since is we've pre-registered a couple of studies, and where possible, those studies are now being finalized. So we haven't published anything yet, but the documentation and data we've now made available on Open Science Framework, and that has led to a few key projects, one of them being Adam's pilot RCT on the effects of physiotherapy-led and music therapist-led breathing exercises on breathing issues in people with breathing pattern disorder. So maybe Adam can tell a little bit more about this project and the other projects I've listed here.
Yeah, thanks, Elmar. So this project came about as a result of the brief award process, and Prof. Christina Victor, in her briefing of the brief award application process, really said that open science needs to be fundamental part of the application and put plans in there, and that led me on to the future work. So this is looking at comparing two similar interventions to treat breathing pattern disorder or dysfunctional breathing. And we are writing up the protocol paper as well, because that should be open access. Thanks, Emma. Back on mute, Elma.
Unmute myself without making the screen smaller. So what we also did is two other projects. Those are the two listed below, where we actually have MSc students involved. So what we recognize is that it's actually important to promote open science and make people aware of the value of open science as early on in education as possible. And it didn't really feature as such officially in our teaching, but with the projects that we now at least initiated, we actually from the outset have emphasize to students that we want to register their protocols, and also ultimately when we do aim to develop publications out of this, to make all the data and all the documentation open access as well. So a good example of this is the third one, the development of a breathing vigilance and awareness scale, which is almost done. That project was actually co-led by Jenny Steinman, a really good now MSc physiotherapy student, and that project is fully registered on OSF, and I'm at the moment now I need to add her still to this page, by the way, because she is now gone, but I need to add her to this. But what we are doing is we make all the documentation related to the development of this scale, including all the decisions made. We will make that available through this website, as well as the underlying data, so that people can all check our analysis and check our decisions made and how we describe that in the paper. So finally, what we're now planning to do, So through these types of projects, we raise awareness of the importance of incorporating open science in research as much as we can. It's not a systematic thing we do yet, but what we, for instance, now have done more and more is with student systematic reviews that they pre-register their search strategy and analysis on open science framework, so that if they do want to go on and publish anything that comes out of it, we have that already time-stamped, etc., transparently reported. But in the future, and this is where we really want to work towards is to develop something akin to an open science, an open access repository for student projects where they can deposit their proposals, their data, and their final report. There are a few caveats with that, including like intellectual property, and you may not always want students to have access to each other's proposals while they're writing their dissertations. So we have to discuss this further, how we can actually do this in a responsible way that addresses all these things. But in the short term, what we want to do is already create like an instructional video with specific advice on how people can use these open science principles and how they can just follow some practical steps like pre-registering their systematic review proposal on open science framework to work towards these laudable goals of including in fostering open science. So what we in the short term we're going to do is initiate some discussions with our physiotherapy staff to see how we can work towards these things and also develop that registry. And we also aim to involve students, of course, with this. So do a survey among our students and investigate what their attitudes are and what they think will be good steps to include in working on this during their dissertations. That was it. Oh, well, one more thing, sorry. Adam, I think you wanted to highlight this one specifically.
Oh yeah, just thanks, Omar. Just very briefly, this is a recent paper published a couple of months ago in a journal that traditionally hasn't done open access, or you've got to pay loads to get it open access. The point being is there was a caveat during COVID where if your project was about COVID, then the journal allowed it to be open access. And as a result, I just wanted to show that, as the majority of you know, impact factor isn't the only impact metric, and open impact in a way on alt metric can show where the article has been used in news outlets as well as other media such as Twitter. So it's interesting to see the reach from other places in an open way as well. Thanks, Emma.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but that was what we had to share at this point.
Thank you so much, Adam and Elma. I think the panel kind of unanimously agreed that the application was really outstanding in the way that it's trying to integrate students as part of the process and to educate them as early as possible into understanding the processes behind open research. So I think, yeah, it was kind of a really unanimous decision, I think, on that front around that. Just to say as well, if anyone has any comments or questions for any of the speakers today, please feel free to ask now or put them in the chat throughout. And yeah, Simon is given a round of virtual applause as well. So congratulations to you both and to Neil as well as the first person from Chimels as well that we announced. So congratulations again. So I've just moving on now, I guess, to our second college of the day, so CDEPS, which actually, so College of Engineering, Design and Physical Sciences, which actually received 3 applications. We did receive the most applications for CDEPS, so we kind of have awarded, I guess, an extra application accordingly. So congratulations to our 3 winners from that college. So Dr. Edward Smith from Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering, Dr. Isabel Sassoon from Computer Science, and Dr. Mohammed El-Zouri from the Brunel Design School. So I'd like to welcome, first of all, Edward to give his brief presentation and to share with us his experiences around open research in this area.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we can see your slides, yeah.
Perfect. I'll start by saying thank you very much to Emma and the judging panel for putting this together. I think it's a fantastic initiative. So with the interest of time, I'll crack on. So for me, the reason open science is so important is it kind of gets to the essence of science itself. And for me, you know, Karl Popper, I think, is probably the best characterization of what science is. So this idea that for something to be a scientific statement, it has to be falsifiable. So that's it both has to be testable, but also it's possible to show whether it's true or false. And the classical example everyone gives is, you know, all swans are white is a clear statement, and then you can find an example that shows that to be false. This actually happened when they found them in Australia. So for a long time, swans were thought to be white, and then obviously that statement becomes false. So with that in mind, let's look at the sort of scientific flow, the process. So an academic does some work, they produce some data, they plot a graph, they produce a paper from that, and that will then be looked at and become useful to the academic community. Now, the idea of open data is that that data should also be put on a cloud. And so this increases the ability to kind of falsify those results. You know, it's not just simply a graph anymore. You've actually got the data, you can interrogate the statistical analysis, and that's probably normally the most dodgy bit, should we say charitably. So, you know, that process of open data kind of lays bare all of the things you've collected in its kind of raw form. Now, my background, I work in fluid dynamics, and a particular type of fluid dynamics where I use molecules. So you can see here we have lots of molecules bouncing around, and the result of that are these complex fluid structures. I won't bore you too much with the details, so I'll just move this panel. The thing to take here is that the Reynolds number of 400, which is by some of the standards, you know, people do, quite small. We're talking 300 million molecules. This is run on a supercomputer. This is generating terabytes of data as snapshots. And so this process would be, you know, if you actually wanted all of the data, that would be all 300 million molecules every single time step. That's obviously impossible. Even a reduced form of that, you know, the kind of reduced data set of snapshots of the averaged flow fields, that's still terabytes of data, you know, and storing this is already a big problem. Now, typically what we do is then produce a set of graphs. Now, these would be using some sort of analysis process that, you know, you'd write scripts or whatever else, produce a paper from that, the academic community can then review that. And in principle, the detailed steps in your paper should be enough to reproduce that. But you certainly can't upload this data here. And so what this means is that you've got this kind of gap, this falsifiability gap, where you can no longer directly get the exact conditions and make sure you can test the statement being made and show whether it's true or false. So my solution to this is to kind of break this up, just so we just think about what the actual steps are. Well, we need some inputs into our software. That software generates lots of data. We do some post-processing process. This would be a script or be another program that gives us a graph that goes into the paper. And then that's looked at by the academic community. And so in order to make this open, I suggest what we need is basically to put together the inputs in the software, and all of that must be on the cloud. You also need the post-processing script. So this is basically everything that is required to reproduce this graph with clear steps showing how to do that. And so then the academic community, in principle, when they've got the inputs and the software, should be able to produce the same loads of data that you've got and do the same analysis. And they can actually check your statement. Now, what's nice about this then is they can actually tweak very small conditions, and they can see whether or not your conclusions are actually robust. You know, you may have run a simulation where you've chosen exactly the right conditions to give you, you know, the results you're presenting. And actually they can test that and say, well, actually, if you do, you know, plus or minus in either way, you get different results. So here's an example from my own research of this. This is an example of the liquid vapor interface. You've got some molecular simulation, you fit some interface, you split it into a kind of grid of volumes, you do analysis in kind of vector space, you average that. And the end of all of this kind of complicated process is a simple line graph. So, you know, don't worry too much about the details. Just, you know, the process, the thing to take away is quite involved, not just the simulation, but also the steps involved in that process. And so you really want to make that easy for people. And so what I did in the most recent publication for this is, you know, put it on archive, of course, open research, available for free, and then actually given all of the input files required, all of the analysis scripts that actually produce all of the different figures, and an explanation written on GitHub of how to actually get the data and put it all together. For me, you know, this reproducibility requires these three components. It should be open software. It should be all input and analysis files, and it should be easy deployment. That is, you can actually run the code. And I would say this should be a requirement for acceptance in journals. So just to break down the tools, I haven't got much time left, but basically you can use things like GitHub and Zenodo to get the software itself, whether that's actually a version of an existing closed source software or open source. You need to make sure it's easy to use. And so that means testing, that means auto building, that means versions on Windows with user interface or Docker containers or Linux or Mac, making sure anyone anywhere can actually produce your code. And then all of the inputs. Now these inputs themselves can be quite big. In the example before, it's sort of 16 gigabyte restart files. And then people can analyze that and get the same graph you got in your figure. So just to finish with, this basically comes back to this essence of science. For it to be falsifiable, I say in my paper, I observe a relationship between X and Y from this code with some given input. Here's the graph that shows it. You can test that. You can start from exactly those conditions and you can check whether or not that statement is true or not. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Edward. Yeah, really well done. And thank you for doing a nice kind of summary as to what open research means to you as well in that short amount of time. I think the panel were really impressed with this application, primarily around the way you kind of described how you deal with big data sets, but also your proposal for your winning video. So all our winners will be producing some sort of training materials to help the Brunel community and beyond understand a bit more about how to integrate these practices. But your application really focused on how we can integrate and promote big data sets and open data generally, and really to describe the step-by-step manners that we can do that as researchers and students and so on. So congratulations. That was a really good presentation and a great application as well. So I will now briefly hand over to our second winner from CDEPS, which is Dr. Isabel Sassoon from Computer Science, to share her presentation as winner. Thank you.
Right, hopefully you can see my screen and you can hear me.
Yeah, we can, yeah.
Right, thank you very much. It's been absolutely great so far to see such varied examples of actual applications of open science. It's quite a broad thing sometimes. But let me talk a bit about my project. The specific work I'll talk about was done under the context of the Immune project, which was a collaboration between Brunel University, led by Loughborough University. And this was a AHRC funded research project under the COVID Rapid Response Fund that ran from March to November 2021. And the purpose of this project was to gain a better understanding of the COVID health certificates, immunity passport, NHS Pass, from a service design perspective. So thinking about how we might design such immunity certificates to meet the needs of people. And we involved users, service providers across different sectors. The way this work was done was very much participatory design and very much with making everything as open as available as possible. So on top of what I'm talking about specifically today, there's vast repositories of all the material we've collected and put together from all of the workshops, focus groups, interviews, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to find out what were the possible risks and unintended consequences of immunity certificates, and see whether we could come up with some blueprints and designs for a service design that would mitigate these risks and unintended consequences. So that's the broad sort of role of the project. Specifically, the role at Brunel, and there were two of us on the project. So I was the Brunel lead PI, and I had a research assistant who since left Brunel. But the two of us, our main task was to design, test, launch, and analyze findings related to a large-scale survey. And we wanted to do that sort of open research, open data, open everything from design to publication. We used Prolific and asked some questions regarding how willing people would be under different scenarios and under different setups to use these passports. So the steps we took in terms of open science, so obviously we went to seek ethics approval, but the moment we did that, we set up an open science framework entry, and as things trickled through, we added everything there. So the ethics form, the questionnaire design, eventually the data itself, and all the scripts that were used to analyze the data and to eventually populate what we had in our papers. It's made available publicly, and it's also linked as Figshare in Brunel Figshare, but also in Loughborough Figshare, as with all the other project outputs. The analysis was done in R, specifically in R Markdown, so it's readable also by those who don't write code. The code is designed so that you can grab the CSV file, grab this script, install R and see what we've done, do it yourself, do something different with it. I also made use of this example as part of the teaching. So I teach on the master's degree data science module. So this was used as a real example to say, we're not just, there's a reason why we're focusing on R Markdown. Here we go, open science. We submitted both preprint and to an open access journal. It's now gone through the sort of process, so it's now published, but it's still also available as medRxiv, CC BY license. All Team ORCIDs were submitted in both cases as we sent the stuff off. And if you want to know more, we have website. You can access obviously the paper and the OSF repository. The link is on this slide. And the team, just to say, Loughborough and Brunel were behind the overall project. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabel, and congratulations again. Just to say, for any of the speakers, if you have any links you want to share in the chat, please feel free. And congratulations again. I know with your application, it was really clear how open research was integrated across the full research process, as you've just shown there as well, which is really helpful. And I think the training that you're going to be working on is going to be around, I think, selecting platform or which of multiple platforms around open science might be most suitable for a given research project, which I think is really helpful, because often it can be a bit overwhelming if you're especially new to thinking about this, what route you might want to choose and what might be the best for your audience and your discipline and so on. So yeah, great, congratulations again. And I think now we'll hand over to our final winner from CDEPS, Mohammed El Zouri from Brunel Design School, to briefly present around his research on using open research.
Yeah, can you see me and hear me okay? Can you see my slides as well?
Yes, we can. Yeah, perfect.
Brilliant. Let me just swap that around. All right, so thank you, Emma, for organising this. I think it's a great initiative, and also thank you for giving me the opportunity to present today. I'm going to be talking about my experience in implementing open research as a practice during my EPSRC scholarship, which was between 2015 and 2019. It focuses on a case from the UK manufacturing industry that also has its own inherent challenges due to the context and ambition behind this project. I did a 4-year-long research project with BAE Systems, which was sponsored by EPSRC and University of Greenwich. The initial data collection showed that critical information in this kind of highly regulated industry often lied within siloed groups of know-how experts. The idea behind the research was to design a software system which was going to be hosted online, and it was going to be run online, in which any of the engineers working within the company, whether they are from the manufacturers or from the design team or from the suppliers, external suppliers to the company, within anywhere in the UK, to have free access in order for them to share technical information and also be able to reuse that information to improve future products. So we have a system that actually can be adapted within the organization, which has been, but also the same system can be scaled up to be adapted within the industry going through similar challenges. And this is always the case within large enterprises. So what I did was I shared the algorithm and the design behind the algorithm through multiple journal papers. One of them is International Journal paper, the International Journal of Product Lifecycle Management, 2019. and International and Journal of Engineering Manufacture Part B, which is part of the IMECI community. So essentially, I engaged two types of communities of practice to lead the development of the system. One was by providing the architecture and the infrastructure design within the software development community, and that was through IJPLM. But also having implemented the system after I've developed it and deployed it within the industry through sharing the algorithm and the data behind it via more mainstream mechanical engineering discipline. Both papers actually selected a different demographic to target. So the first one was the Asian Digital Library Index, and that was the target for that one, whereas the second one was more of a mainstream adaptation of the technology. And the important part of that was looking out for the Google Scholar Index and how the semantics worked for that. In essence, I think targeting different communities of practice is extremely helpful. It also allows you to promote different types of usage within different demographics. It also increased the visibility and the impact of the research in the long run. So I think a lot of things I've learned within that particular experience, but those were more hard practices. And I think a big part of this is also softer practices. So the defense and communications industry is a very highly regulated and sensitive industry. One unique aspect, one unique challenge within this particular research was to be able to develop methods that will anonymize and make sure that the data being uploaded to the portal was sensitive, desensitized, in order to publish the work. And this required countless meetings and reviews with the stakeholders, but it was very much worthwhile. It's also important to mention in my research to try and make it more open, I had to pay more attention to building momentum through persistent networking, continuously engaging with a community of practice. For example, the Drupal developers community, which had a massive input into the development of the framework through an online discussion forum and other things like that. For me, another key community of practice was the committee from the International Conference on Manufacturing Research. It was my favorite network to make my presence known on a regular basis, and eventually that resulted in a lot of indirect opportunities. One of them was being invited to co-host one of their events at the hosting university. And then I was invited again to co-edit, a joint co-editing of their proceedings, which allowed me to develop a massive network with 150 other researchers, interdisciplinary researchers. That some of the work that came after that was a result. One last note on this presentation was that I had to make sure that my data was continuously being disseminated via building public profiles, such as having a lot of visibility on ResearchGate, Scopus, Google Scholar, OrgID, Pablons, and making sure that they are all cohesive and linked very well. Because if you're missing different pieces of work within any of these profiles, it does affect how your citations are then numerically counted and how your public profile displays on other people in your network. I think a key part of this is to set up an automation so that your work is always indexed through that automation, so you don't have to post manual content and provide manual linkage processes every time. This is really important, I thought, because it helped me provide more open access under different types of licenses through different platforms. One was obviously the Creative Commons license, but other means of sharing that data, such as sharing preprints, accepted manuscripts, the data behind the algorithm and methods used to develop the research. So thank you for the opportunity to present today. If you want to learn more about some of the research I did for this particular project with UK manufacturers, BAE Systems, then you can find me on the Brunel website link. And thank you, Emma.
Thanks very much, Mohammed. I think The panel really noted about your application, that it came obviously from an early career perspective and the lessons that you'd learned around integrating open research from that perspective, and also your proposal for the training that you'll go on to do as a result of winning this award was around focusing on how we can think about licensing of our work and what licenses we might need to consider for what types of work, which we're going to kind of set you up working with the Open Research and Rights Office at Brunel to think a bit more about that and to provide some resources to support people around that space as well. So congratulations, Mohammed, a really great application and a clear presentation, I think, as well there. So I'll go on now to just introduce our final winner for these first Brunel Open Research Awards, which is Dr. Manu Savani from Politics and History in CBAS, to outline her work and her proposal, I think, for what she'll be doing with the training that she'll be setting up. Thanks, Manu.
Great. Hope you can see my slides there. And excellent. Thank you very much for having me, Emma, and thank you to the whole panel for this opportunity. I'm a lecturer in public policy, and my particular subfield is behavioural public policy. So I'm interested in how behavioural biases, work from the behavioural sciences, behavioural economics can affect behaviours and policy outcomes, and to use those insights to see how policy can be designed better. So in my work, I use lots of experiments as much as I can. Pre-pandemic, it was a bit easier to run field experiments. So to give you an example, I ran a trial with Camden Local Authority to investigate how a behavioural nudge, a commitment device, supported people who had signed up for weight loss programs. More recently, I've been doing more work on survey experiments. So these are experiments that can be run online, and looking not just at health behaviours, but also political behaviours around voting decisions, but also how voters evaluate candidates for office. And what I'm interested in really as an experimentalist is many of the principles that have already been talked about this morning. So thinking about how to make sure these experiments are designed well, they are conducted transparently with a real eye to key quality indicators to show that they are reproducible and really giving us kind of valid insight. So the focus really of my project here will be pre-registration. So this is something that I came to as I got more into experiments, and in the politics field, there has been a registry, Experiments in Governance and Politics, the EGAP registry, which has been very active over the last 5 years or so. That's now folded into the OSF, the Open Science Framework. But to give you just an example of one project that I've done recently with my co-author, Sophia Collignon, this is an online survey experiment we did with American voters. It was coming on the back of a number of high-profile political scandals with accusations of sexual misconduct. So we ran an experiment to see why do voters evaluate candidates the way they do? How come many people who are accused of sexual misconduct go on to be elected? And in doing that, we set up this pre-registration on EGAP, which is now on OSF. So just to give you an example of what that looks like, but I think everybody here knows very well what the OSF interface is. But the kind of bigger picture, I guess, is, again, coming back to these themes that other speakers have raised, we want to try and avoid phishing, which is perhaps kind of looking for the best way to present certain findings and going for those the significant stars and the big treatment effects. We want to avoid that and really just report what's in the data. And we also want to try and avoid publication bias. And pre-registration, I think, is a really important way of getting at both of those. So what I do in my work is to specify in advance the questions I'm investigating with the pre-specified theory and the hypotheses that arise. I explain how I'm planning to collect that data with things like stopping rules, what's the pre-calculated sample size that I'm going for, so there's a clear and defined plan for how much data I collect and when I stop. But also the analysis plan, that's really important, the pre-analysis plan really, because that's uploaded along with everything else in the pre-registration, and that really sets out the kind of statistical modelling I'm going to do. what kind of moderators I'm looking at, if I'm looking at not just the average treatment effects, but the heterogeneous treatment effects, and also around data and variables, how am I measuring certain concepts. So that's the kind of detail that goes into pre-registration. And what I wanted to do with this award really is to address some of the concerns that critics might have, that pre-registration and pre-analysis planning can constrict the process of discovery. It can constrict the joy, I suppose, of coming upon something, a new trend, a new insight in the data, or indeed that it adds to the bureaucracy and to the time involved in undertaking research. So I want to address those concerns, and really what I'd like to do is just offer a walkthrough process of how to go about this kind of pre-registration. And I'm hoping to show in that a lot of the information that goes into it are questions that will be in people's minds anyway, when they're planning a project, when they're applying for a grant, certainly when they're designing surveys or other data collection tools. The information is probably in our minds, and this is really just about setting it down transparently and clearly in advance, and then holding yourself to that when it comes to the analysis, but not in a way that's totally restrictive. So the idea is with a lot of the work that I do with colleagues, we might set out with a plan, but no experiment ever goes according to plan. So it's about just being really reflective about how did things work, and are there other things in the data that we weren't expecting to see, but we have discovered, and how do you bring that into your story, but being clear that this was perhaps more of an exploratory finding than a confirmatory finding. So that's really how I want to kind of bring pre-registration perhaps to more of my social science colleagues. And yeah, thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Manu. And I think you've really kind of shown there your kind of clear plan on what you're going to do for this training. I think it's very much needed as well, the step-by-step approach to pre-registration, where, as you said, like a lot of considerations you've already thought about. It's just how to articulate them and to put them on virtual paper, I guess, with a pre-registration. So congratulations to Manu as our final winner of the award. So I wanted to just end with some reflections and also some pointers, really. So these are all our winners again on paper. So take a screenshot if you're planning to share online at all. So congratulations to all of our 6 winning applications, and we really hope that we can run these applications again in future years to really chart the kind of progress that Brunel was making in this area, and to celebrate the steps towards open research that our community is making across career stages. So I wanted to highlight really the important work that Brunel's Open Research and Rights Office does across many of the facets of things that we're speaking about today. So there are some kind of highlight email addresses there if you have any queries about these kind of key concerns. We're really also going to be working as the Brunel Open Research Working Group to really increase across the board the amount of support around open research across career stages, really starting with the winners of these awards and the content that they produce, and to kind of start and build from there to really make sure that we have support across all the different facets of open research that we've talked about today. And also some pointers, I guess, to some introductory resources as well that are kind of developed by, I guess, national and international different groups around open science and open research, designed to be kind of as interdisciplinary, I guess, as possible. And of course, I hope next year I'll be adding to this with our winning kind of content that's created from our award winners. So we'll look forward to seeing the results of that. So I just wanted to end by thanking you all for your time, and thanking you to everyone that applied for this first iteration of our awards, and our judges as well. We look forward to hopefully bringing these in future years and to track the process that we're making across the university. So congratulations again to all our award winners, and thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day, and enjoy the rest of the Brunel Research Festival.